A highly illustrative, dramatic and intense story is now unfolding on the Ukrainian geopolitical track. The Belarusian leader and Minsk dictator Lukashenko suddenly made an unexpected statement that he is ready to personally travel to Ukraine for a high-level meeting with Zelensky. A formal response from the office of the President of Ukraine followed almost immediately and turned out to be as tough, blunt and ironic as possible. The words of this gentleman have meant absolutely nothing since the year 2022. However, behind this facade of loud statements lies a much more serious subtext. The reputable agency Bloomberg stirred up the information space with an insider report. The White House has begun exerting serious pressure on Kyiv, demanding that sanctions against Belarusian potash fertilizers be eased. Why is Lukashenko so eager to meet with Zelensky? Why are the United States willing to forgive Minsk's complicity in aggression for the sake of potash? And how does Bankova plan to fend off this pressure? Well, you'll find more details in our report. You are watching the Glavrid channel. I'm your host, Yevhen Serov. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's start with Kyiv's official position. Dmytro Litvin, the president's communications advisor, commented on Lukashenko's statement about his willingness to come to Ukraine. And he didn't mince words. I quote, "Since 2022, it's been obvious to everyone that this gentleman's words mean nothing, so we watch his actions." Moreover, Litvin reminded viewers of the Belarusian dictator's eternal habit, and I quote, "It's a bit dumb to come up with after the fact where an attack on him was supposedly being prepared from. So what is there to talk about?" While Lukashenko was complaining to journalists that he has things to discuss with the Americans, Germans and Poles, but nothing to talk about with Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky was in Slavutich, on the border with Belarus, where he was directly communicating with local communities, including on issues of security along the northern borders. Kyiv is making it clear no one is going to take Minsk at its word. Only tanks, troops and fortifications on the border matter. But why has Lukashenko ramped up his peace-loving rhetoric right now? The answer lies in a Bloomberg publication. According to the agency's sources, the US administration is trying to force Ukraine to ease restrictions on the import of potash fertilizers from Belarus. Moreover, Washington wants Kyiv to act as a lobbyist for this idea and persuade European countries, particularly Poland and Lithuania, to open transit for Belarusian potash. Let me remind you, before the war, potash fertilizers were the main source of foreign currency revenue for Lukashenko's regime. EU sanctions dealt a devastating blow to this sector, completely tying Minsk to the Kremlin. Why are the United States doing this? Analysts point to Washington's classic policy approach. They are trying to offer Lukashenko an economic carrot to encourage him to pursue a multi-vector policy and at least somewhat distance himself from Putin. But in the office of the President of Ukraine, this White House initiative was met with extreme skepticism. Dmytro Litvin stated outright that easing restrictions is unlikely to bring peace any closer. On the contrary, it will only give Putin more confidence that he too can simply outlast Western sanctions. What are your thoughts on this matter? Should Ukraine consider a compromise with the United States regarding Belarusian fertilizers if Washington offers a larger package of military assistance in return? Or should the current sanctions remain strictly in place without any exceptions? Please share your opinion with us in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.
So, are you ruling out the possibility that Russia might try to advance on Kyiv again?
No, I'm not ruling it out. That's possible. But I must point out the situation is different from 2022, so there won't be a lightning-fast blitzkrieg this time. First of all, they don't have the means or the manpower. 700,000 Russian troops are bogged down on the Ukrainian fronts. You can't just pull them out. So, to attack, you'd need to withdraw someone. You'd have to pull out the professional troops. That way, the fronts that are important to Russia become weakened. Second question. Belarus, what can it offer? To be perfectly honest with you, what can it really offer? I've spoken with some Belarusian opposition figures who are closely and carefully monitoring the situation there, using their own independent resources to track Belarus's equipment and ammunition. And here's what they say. There's a lot of information that in 2022 and 2023, the Russians took aviation, helicopters, planes, and countless shells from the warehouses of the Republic of Belarus, simply removing them and transporting them to the Ukrainian fronts. So the question is, what is left there to fight with? There's really not much left to fight with there. And finally, the last thing, the Belarusian army has no combat experience. None at all. Since gaining independence, the Republic of Belarus has not participated in a single combat engagement, not in any conflict. Even the Russian army has gained experience during that time. The First Chechen War, the Second Chechen War, Syria, some mercenaries in Africa. So they have had experience. Belarus, zero, just completely sterile. That's why I honestly don't believe they could be of any help in, say, a hypothetical invasion, even if they were to go together with Russian troops. In other words, as helpers, they're useless.
Then why have the Russians been trying for so long to drag Belarus into the war, to pull its troops into the war? Why does Putin need this little Belarus with its inexperienced army? What do Moscow's persistent efforts to get Belarus to join the war reveal regarding the current state of the Russian army and the nation of Russia as a whole?
Let me explain this to you. Look, Ukraine currently has a front line that's 1,200 kilometers long. 1,200 kilometers, that is the total length of the front line. And the total line of contact is 3,000 kilometers. That's including the border with the Republic of Belarus, so with them included, so it's almost 3,000. No matter how you look at it, Ukraine is forced to keep its forces along this entire stretch. The Russian command operates with a clear and ironclad strategic logic. The more hotspots that emerge on the border between Ukraine and Russia or with Belarus, the more attention our general staff has to devote to managing them. This forces us to take some people, say, from Pokrovsk, from Kostiantynivka or from Kupiansk, and redeploy them to those border areas. According to Lukashenko, to use his exact phrasing, he claims that there are almost 15,000 of our Ukrainian military personnel currently positioned and stationed along the border with Belarus on the Ukrainian side. So that's a significant force. And the Russians understand perfectly well that this force could at any moment be redeployed, for example, to Kostiantynivka to repel a Russian offensive. In other words, these are new, fresh troops. We can use them. That's why everything is being done to prevent our command from having that opportunity. There's tension there, we have to keep people there, we have to send in reinforcements. And it's these kinds of hotspots that keep the Ukrainian command stretched to the limit.
So Russia needs Belarus to enter the war only in order to stretch our forces.
Or at least the threat, the presence of a threat, a serious threat, that this could happen. Remember when Ukraine carried out an operation in the Kursk region? In exactly the same way, there were reports that the Belarusian army had moved closer to the border with Ukraine. And what was the objective then? Our command sees this kind of situation and is forced to panic, forced to urgently pull people from all different directions and move them closer to Belarus, just in case, to prevent the advance of the Belarusian army. So it's more of an attempt to stretch our command, our resources, and put us in a very difficult position.
That is, even if we hypothetically assume that Belarus enters the war, this would in no way help Russia turn the tide in this war or allow the Russian or Russian Belarusian forces to reach Kyiv, as they did, say, in 2022.
Well, I am absolutely certain it wouldn't help, because once again, in my deep conviction, these would be the last days, well, perhaps the last couple of weeks, of the Belarusian regime's existence. That is, it would be the only wrong move Lukashenko has made in his career, and the one that would lead to the fall of his regime, because this would happen immediately. What would I do? For example, let's suppose, once again, Belarus launches a limited offensive somewhere, trying to break through our defenses. In that case, I would summon, I'm not sure as president or as commander-in-chief, I would summon the Belarusian patriots who are fighting in the armed forces of Ukraine, the Kalinowski fighters. There aren't many of them, just a few hundred people. And I would say the following: you now have the opportunity to return home. You can now take as many weapons from the warehouses as you can carry yourself. Cross the border, break through the border, enter the first settlement, some first village, seize the local police station, take the weapons and distribute them to your fellow citizens. Then, with your increased number of people, go to the next village, seize the local police station, distribute the weapons again, move to the district center, then the regional center, and so on and so forth. In other words, this is your move. And please, we will help you in any way we can. We will support your breakthrough across the border with our drones. But when you return home, you must overthrow the Lukashenko regime. You are patriots, you are citizens of Belarus, we cannot be there. And this, I am sure, will work against Lukashenko.
All right, Another point. How likely do you think it is, and do you believe it is possible, that Russia could carry out some kind of operation against NATO countries, either one NATO country or several at once? Are there currently any visible signs, or are there any specific indications right now, that Russia is actively preparing to carry out some kind of provocation or a hostile operation against alliance countries in the very near future?
This has been circulating for a while. Speculations suggest preparations are underway for a possible provocation, but as for when, with what forces, and in which direction, it remains unclear. Of course, there are the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. I understand all of that perfectly well. There is Suwalki, the Suwalki corridor, which has already been discussed a lot as a potential theoretical hotspot, but so far the Kremlin has not dared to act on it. Why? Because Suwalki is almost 100 kilometers long. If you want to capture it, you need to understand how wide it would be. 100 meters? 200? 1 kilometer? 2? 5 kilometers? 100 kilometers wide. So where to? Deeper into Polish territory or deeper into Lithuanian territory? And these are populated areas, so you would essentially have to occupy them. Just how many people would need to be involved? For the Russian Federation, the math simply doesn't add up here. In other words, it all looks very complicated for now. Another option is the city of Narva. Yes, there's a lot of talk about this, that Narva could theoretically become such a place where the Russian Federation might use force. I don't rule it out. Personally, I leave a high probability for something like the operation to seize Crimea or the Donetsk region. Like 200 or 300 armed men without insignia, without identification marks, seizing the post office, the telephone exchange, the telegraph, the city hall, the mayor, the town hall. In the morning, they round up the deputies at gunpoint, force them to vote for secession, say, from Estonia to join the Russian Federation, and call out, "Russia, send in the troops," and the Russian flag is raised. So I don't rule out this kind of scenario. This is very much in the style of the Russian army, or rather the Russian Kremlin, with minimal forces and maximum efficiency, the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. Russians have talked about it a lot. It could be seized, the Russian flag could be raised there, a Russian lighthouse set up, maybe even a dock for Russian ships. So all of this is theoretically possible, but again, it depends on what the Kremlin decides and whether it currently has the physical resources for it. Well, again, if we're talking about a full-scale military operation, I think they're having difficulties with that because they can't even keep up with supplying the fronts. But this kind of hybrid approach, say, using military intelligence forces, taking special units like Alpha and Wimpel, which belong to the FSB, so in principle they could be, well, forces similar to Strokov-Gherkin's units. Yes, well, you could basically gather 230 people, plus some local fringe elements, some criminal elements. This is all possible. You're asking whether he'll go through with it? Well, it's quite an adventure. But we don't know what's going on in his head, what his worldview is, or what he's being told. He's a person who doesn't use any form of modern communication at all. That is, they even bring him paper printouts from the internet, from YouTube, printouts from YouTube, Carl. He doesn't watch it. Why? Because he believes that gadgets are all a CIA plot. That's how they can track where I am. So he doesn't use them. And you know, it's almost like a joke. Remember that story? That the Russian army captured Kupiansk. Kupiansk. They say Kupiansk. They captured it. The war correspondents say no, it hasn't been captured. But still, Valery Gerasimov and Andrei Belousov stubbornly report that it has been captured. So on their map, Kupiansk has long been Russian. And we don't even know, for example, what if, according to their map, the Russian army is already somewhere near the Kyiv region? Is that possible? And his decision-making is based on deliberately false information. So it's very sad that this person, sad for whom? For all of us. That he has some kind of map. They tell him, well, there are successes here, just a little more effort is needed, even though in reality it will take another 2 or 3 years. But according to his map, according to the reports from his commanders, everything is fine. We're defeating everyone. It's like Hitler in the last weeks of his war. He was leading troops that didn't exist. He was moving pieces. Now these ones will come, they'll strike here, but in reality they don't even exist.